This week, the SEC cracks down on the crypto industry with a wave of new rules and enforcement action. Do Kwon gets slapped with charges from the US regulator for allegedly misleading investors on the Terra USD stablecoin, and Bitcoin briefly hits $25,000 yesterday before turning lower. We break down this week's price action with Callie Cox of eToro. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Jordan Smith. It's been a strong week for the cryptocurrency market, with Bitcoin and Ether both rising about 13% in the past 7 days, and Polygon surging a whopping 17%. Compare that to the S&P 500, which fell by nearly 1% as markets fear more interest rate hikes and high inflation. This week, the SEC was front and center as the U.S. regulator amped up its efforts to crack down on crypto companies. The U.S. regulator proposed tighter rules on which crypto companies can hold customer assets. They came for staking protocols in their settlement with Kraken. And just yesterday, the SEC sued Terraform Labs, the company behind the failed Terra USD stablecoin, and its co-founder Do Kwon. The regulator alleges that the firm and the exec committed fraud and sold unregistered securities. The SEC claims Do Kwon and Terraform knew that if the UST stablecoin fell below its $1 peg and wasn't quickly restored, it could, quote, spell doom for the entire Terraform ecosystem. You can go read that full story over at CNBC.com. But while this regulatory crackdown was happening, we also got new data that showed inflation is still hotter than expected, driven mainly by transportation costs like gas and car insurance. Rising costs normally would have scared off crypto investors, but they just didn't seem to care this time around. Bitcoin and other major cryptocurrencies actually rallied that same day. So to make sense of all the headlines this week, I asked Callie Cox, an investment analyst at eToro, to chat with me about the key stories that shaped crypto markets over the past 7 days. Hey, Callie, it's good to see you.
Hey, happy Friday. It's good to be here.
Happy Friday. All right. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't start us off by asking about Do Kwon and Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to comment on legal proceedings or anything like that. That's not your area of focus. But I am curious from a market's perspective, if investors even care about the latest drama there, do these sorts of enforcement actions have the power to move markets like they did maybe in 2022? Or are investors saying, yeah, these legal battles are happening, but we're going to do our own thing?
Yeah, well, I think you can look at the price and basically figure it out for yourself. I mean, it's clearly not having there's clearly not an issue, at least in Bitcoin investors' minds. It almost seems like we've been through this before, where we've seen these really awful headlines and we've kind of worked it in, but now it's kind of expected in a way for the crypto industry, which is a really, really tough thing to say, and it shows how the industry is at a pivotal point right now. But it doesn't seem like crypto investors are skipping a beat.
Yeah, then that also, I think, goes hand in hand with the SEC and all the moves it made this week around rules change proposals and enforcement actions around staking offerings. Again, you're not here to comment on the regulation itself. I more want to know if that's a threat to sentiment in the markets, if harsh regulation will affect prices negatively in the long term. I mean, we saw negative headlines and selling this week, and I think investors had a moment to digest that and turn things around. But is a prolonged regulatory fight bad for sentiment?
Well, I think it's definitely a source of uncertainty. That's the most basic thing you can kind of conclude from it. And it's a source of uncertainty for everybody. I mean, nobody knows what will happen there. And there are a lot of theories flying around. Again, it doesn't seem like it's really deterring the appetite for cryptos, especially the more brand name or the more established cryptos. But at the same time, I mean, there seems to be a lot of headline risk still within the industry too, with the fact that, I mean, again, nobody knows what could happen here. But I will point out another thing too. There's a subset of investors who don't invest in crypto because regulation is such murky ground. So, having some more clarity on regulation could actually be a good thing for the space. So there are pros and cons to it.
Yeah, that's something I brought up earlier this week in some of the conversations we've had on Crypto World, is that it seems to me, based on all of the conversations we've had with institutions who have said, okay, we're waiting for regulatory clarity before we jump in, that this could be a situation where if they have clarity on what a qualified custodian is or what the rules are around custody and customer assets, that it could be a good thing for institutional adoption, that they could say, hey, yeah, no, we have clarity now. We're ready to figure out how to use crypto in our businesses. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, so it makes sense. It could be a good thing for institutional investors. We focus more on retail investors. since we are a broker dealer. But you're seeing the same thing among the retail crowd too. You're seeing a subset of investors that say, I don't even want to touch crypto right now because there's so much uncertainty on the regulatory front. And there's a trust issue too. So, of course, we're in support of healthy regulation that helps push forward innovation as well. But, I think some kind of clarity on that end could be good for both parties. And then there can be second order effects from that too. More institutional activity within the crypto market could lead to more stability in prices. It could lead to more use cases. And that's a good thing for both retail and more institutional investors.
Because you keep such a close eye on the retail investor, I do want to know from your perspective, who's sort of in the driver's seat for the market right now? We've heard so often that retail investors are on the sidelines. They haven't come back yet. Are you seeing any signs that they are starting to come back into crypto and maybe they are starting to buy more? What does it look like out there right now?
Yeah, well, I don't think they ever left. I think they just sat there and held. And we actually see that in a lot of survey data that we collect. We actually ask U.S. investors on a quarterly basis, what's in their portfolios, how have they changed their investing strategies, and some of them sold out. I'll be honest, but on the most part, allocations haven't really changed, even for crypto. We've seen more diversification. We've seen investors, look to raise a little bit of cash, look to, put their money in more conservative assets. But on the whole, we haven't seen a lot of fleeing from the crypto space. We've just seen a lot of holding, a lot of waiting for what's next. And I think that's a positive. And I think that's why we're seeing the kind of foundation that we're seeing in Bitcoin prices, where Bitcoin got around 17 or 18K, and then it just kind of turned around. There's that base that believes in the long-term power of crypto and the concept of decentralization, and that hasn't really changed. So I think it's changed. I think retail sentiment has changed a little bit since the beginning of the year, especially with all the signs we've seen of progress in inflation and the speculation up until recently that the Fed could be done hiking rates. Obviously, that might be going out the window now, but we've seen more appetite of investors wanting to step in and possibly speculate and possibly get back into more aggressive trade when it comes to crypto.
I love that you set me up for the next point I wanted to talk to you about, which was the macro environment, specifically with inflation. We got CPI data that was a little higher than experts were expecting, and normally that would probably lead to a sell-off for crypto because they're expecting higher interest rates or a more hawkish Fed. But this time around, Bitcoin kept on trucking. It rose that day. Is the inflation narrative in the rear view for crypto? Are we done with that and we're ready to move on?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Jordan. So I was looking at some historical data, and it looks like Bitcoin has outperformed the S&P 500 on the last 4 CPI days. And we've gotten some mixed data there, like inflation has been slowing, but the details haven't been as great. So it's interesting to me that something like crypto that's seen as a risk asset could outperform when the inflation picture is so murky. And I think that just speaks to the fact that sentiment for so long, crypto sentiment for so long was just so far in the dumps. There was a lot of bad news priced in. And now that, we've gone through a few storms and we're not quite out of it yet, but prices have been hammered a lot. It seems like Bitcoin investors and crypto investors in general are willing to look on the brighter side of things. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that inflation is definitely making progress. We've gone from a 9 handle in CPI, 9% year over year, down to a 6 handle. And a lot of that's been driven by goods inflation, but that's still progress. That's still price control that the Fed, that's ultimately where the Fed wants to go. They want to get inflation under control, and they're seeing that happen. So I do think that there are a lot of mixed signals when it comes to inflation data right now, but Bitcoin investors just are more apt to look on the bright side of things because prices are so low.
So, paired with that, I think on Wall Street, you're hearing so much conversation still because of that mixed data on whether we'll have a soft landing, whether we'll avoid a prolonged recession. How much of that is still on the mind of the crypto investor? Are they still waiting for that soft landing, or does that optimism carry out across the idea that, okay, even if we do have a bumpy ride, we'll still be investing in crypto?
So I think crypto investors still do believe in the soft landing. I think that's the belief across markets right now. And you've seen over the past few months, you've seen markets rebound and position for the fact that the Fed could really pull this off. I think you have to be a little careful. I mean, we're finding out, especially over the past week, that the Fed doesn't think the job is done yet, and the data shows that the job is far from done, even though we're making progress. So I think crypto and stock investors are digesting that right now, and surprisingly enough, crypto hasn't reacted as much to it. So I do think you have to be careful as we hear the headlines and we hear about the fact that rate hikes might not be done, and even if they are done, we could see rates stay high for a really long time as the Fed tries to get inflation down. So, the inflation picture in my mind is kind of a wash for crypto. I think that crypto could stumble here, especially around these levels, but I also think, kind of like the stock market, that we could find ourselves being stuck in this purgatory where there's like a fight between markets and the Fed, and you don't see a lot of movement. You don't see this like drastic sell-off, but at the same time, there isn't a lot of impetus to move higher in prices.
I think that's a good preview of when I ask you about your outlook at the end of this conversation. But I do want to drill down just a little bit. I mean, Bitcoin's up something like 35 to 45% for the year, depending on the day. What is it about 2023 that's made these gains possible?
Well, I think we're putting 2022 in the rearview mirror, aren't we? It is funny though. It's like we turned the calendar and then Bitcoin was kind of off to the races. And you're right. I mean, Bitcoin is up 30 to 40% this year, which seems really drastic, but you have to remember it was down 80% last year. And percentages can get kind of weird when you're talking about like a vicious bear market into a bull market. So I say that just to say it's really hard to understand how much Bitcoin should have rallied off of good news. And sentiment definitely plays into it. But I think this is where it's important to mention too that you have to be careful about what this rally has consisted of. Because if you look at the stock market, a lot of the rally we've seen over there has been growth fueled. It's been more speculative stocks, more tech stocks, and at the same time, yields have been rising over the past 2 weeks or so. And those two facts don't really jive with each other. If you're looking at more growth concept like assets or growth or concept like markets, typically they don't tend to do as well when rates stay high. So that's confused us a little bit, and I would throw crypto and Bitcoin into that bucket. I think Bitcoin's in a weird spot right now because we can say that it's a risk asset, but within the crypto space, it's kind of seen as the quality institutional asset, kind of like the crypto version of gold. So, some crypto investors could be looking toward Bitcoin and saying, okay, well, that seems to be the safe haven of crypto. So, maybe I'll allocate more over there without losing my exposure to crypto in general. But at the same time, I mean, Bitcoin doesn't have cash flows. It's hard to figure out where the fundamentals are right now. And I mean, a lot of people invest in Bitcoin because they're excited about the future of crypto. And that value is kind of a question. So Bitcoin's at this interesting juncture where some may see it as a quality asset, others may see it as a growth asset. And depending on how you see it, the rally could either make a lot of sense or it could be a little weird.
Yeah, well, following along that theme, when we were speaking before this interview, you mentioned the idea of a flight to quality where investors are favoring Bitcoin or ETH over altcoins or speculative trades. And we actually spoke to Goldman Sachs here on Crypto World, their head of digital assets, about this point last week, and he said this.
What we've seen, and I think the CME and others have seen this as well, is a flight to quality. So we've seen more of our larger clients eager to kind of onboard and trade with, what they probably perceive to be kind of much better regulated and capitalized entities. So that, again, is been another byproduct of last year.
Can you talk a little bit more about that trend for flight to quality and your take on it and how investors are moving their money around?
Yeah, so this actually dovetails well with our outlook. And, we believe that the Fed could keep rates higher for longer. We believe that inflation could be hard to get under control. We're at 6%, but it may be hard to get it down to that 2% target. So when you think about that, I mean, you have to be careful with more speculative or growth-focused assets, and we would put Bitcoin in that bucket. But kind of going back to what I said a minute ago, Bitcoin can be seen as both. If you're a crypto investor, Bitcoin could look quality to you because it has that institutional adoption It has that building on top of the blockchain. It has that correlation with the stock market. So if you were invested in an altcoin, for example, Bitcoin might look like a stable alternative to you. But if you're stacking Bitcoin up against stocks or bonds, it may look more like a growth asset. So we're seeing this flight to quality within crypto, like you mentioned, where altcoins may not be doing as well this year, or you may see like flares of speculation here and there, but we've seen a lot of flows in general into Bitcoin and Ethereum and a lot of the brand name cryptos.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think there's a reason for that. I think a lot of crypto investors have been burned, and they're thinking about what could stand this test of time and what could stand this high rate environment if you don't think the industry is going away.
Yeah, I do want to ask about some of that speculation for the investors that are. I think of Solana and Polygon as sort of the big ones. I say Polygon because talk about it at the top of the show. It's up like 17% this week, and a large part of that is driven by speculation around its ZK EVM and general optimism for the platform. So in the case that there is speculation, is it less about pumping a specific crypto or the meme trade, and is it really about those real world use cases? So it is speculative, but there is real promise to what investors are putting their money behind.
I think you're right. I think they are looking for the use cases. And one interesting metric I'd like to watch is developer growth, where the developer growth is happening, because those are the builders right there. Those are the people, the worker ants building those use cases. And if you look at developer growth, obviously Ethereum tops the list. There's a really good Electric Capital report that came out at the beginning of the year that basically shows developer growth over the past year. Ethereum topped the list, obviously. But I think the fact that we are seeing, developers flock to certain blockchains, and the fact that we are seeing certain blockchains move forward is seen as a good thing in this environment. Because again, crypto investors have been burned on the more speculative stuff recently. And, in a high rate environment, it's becoming really obvious that you need to find the economic value of what you're investing in. You need to focus on what's working now or what could work soon. Obviously crypto is still a young market, but I think there are a few things you can look at if you're searching for that eventual use case. And yeah, I think investors are paying a lot more attention to that.
So as we wrap this up, I want to turn to Outlook. You spoke to my wonderful co-host, Tanae McKeel, about crypto, and you told her to expect one more pullback or so before another chance at a real rally. And that was a few weeks ago when you had that conversation. But have you seen that pullback yet, or are you still waiting for a sign that we could have a retreat before another rally?
So I think the foundation for Bitcoin is in. Of course, none of us know what the future holds. I don't have a crystal ball. I'll put that out there right now. But I think from the price action we've seen and the fact that Bitcoin and other cryptos have been extra reactive to good news, I think it's becoming safe to say that we've seen kind of the bottom in sentiment. We've seen like the worst mood you could see in crypto, and now investors are kind of looking at a bright future ahead. That being said, crypto is kind of in the same spot as other markets we're looking at right now, where high rates are a really tough environment for growth, and it could be tougher to see Bitcoin post some significant gains from here while we're sitting in this high rate environment, while we're trying to focus on use cases, while we're trying to find or focusing more on cash flow producing assets, for example. And like I said earlier, Bitcoin's at this interesting juncture where it's considered the quality of crypto, but stack it up against other assets and it's seen in a growthier space. So I think that push and pull could keep Bitcoin around the 20K level. And I'll throw in too, Bitcoin technicals are really important, and Bitcoin broke its 200-day. And I think the 200-day could be an interesting floor. So there's a lot of push and pull, especially around the Fed. Investors in general are focused a lot on interest rate policy right now. So it could be a while before we see Bitcoin take off again. That being said, I'm not super bearish at the moment on it.
Yeah, that is actually a wonderful transition into my very last question, which is, what are you watching right now? Is it from a data point perspective that maybe people don't pay enough attention to, or a headline that maybe you think should have more attention in the coming weeks or months that could move markets? What do you think are the big trends that we should be watching in the markets going forward?
So short term, I'm definitely watching technicals. I'm seeing if Bitcoin can hold that 200-day moving average. I like looking at moving averages because I'm not a technician. That's as basic as you can get, but the 200-day has some compelling data behind it, showing that, it tends to act as resistance or support for Bitcoin prices moving ahead. So I'm watching institutional adoption too, seeing, what projects other institutions are looking at and where they want to put their money. And I'm looking at where the use cases are long term. I want to see how crypto ties itself to the economy and how crypto finds its utility, because I think that's the most important focus for the industry right now. We know the concept of decentralization is compelling, but how do we adopt it to real world use cases? We have some concepts, but we need to move forward on those. So as an analyst, I want to see how those materialize more.
Callie, that was a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time and capping off the week with me with all the headlines that we saw.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, that's all for Crypto World this week, but we'll be back again on Tuesday after the holiday weekend, so we'll see you then.